Forge Guy! I am still a hot man! I am Imperator of Forge, otherwise known as Forge Warhammer. And I am back. Yesterday I did The Proclaimers of God's Kingdom, 1870 to 1914. This time I will be doing Chapter 6, A Time of Testing, 1914 to 1918. So, much as with the First Adventist Movement and Richard Miller and the Great Disappointment of 1844, or much as with the Great Disappointment of 1844 and Richard Miller and the Adventist Movement, much of the same is going to happen in this case with the time of testing and the failure of the return of Jesus Christ in the year 1914 and the end of the world in 1914 in the case of the Watchtower Society. It is important to understand that they are not Jehovah's Witnesses as of this time. They will not be known as Jehovah's Witnesses until a little bit later. This is 1914. They are the Watchtower Society. They are the Watchtower Society. They will be known as Jehovah's Witnesses later. Also, Charles Taze Russell dies, or Charles Taze Russell passes away, and there is a change in administration. So, I talked a bit about the Great Apostasy and the restoration of the true Word of God as it was in the first century, and its restoration under the Watchtower Society, or at least this is what they teach. Keep in mind that this is what they teach. I am reading what they are saying. All right, Chapter 6, A Time of Testing, 1914 to 1918. And I will have to expand this out a bit. All right. Let us remember, I just cannot see that for nothing. There we go. Let us remember that we are in a testing season. If there is any reason that would lead any to let go of the Lord and his truth and cease sacrificing for the Lord's cause, then it is not merely the love of God in the heart which has prompted interest in the Lord, but something else, probably a hoping that the time was short and the consecration was only for a certain time. If so, now it is a good time to let go. Those words appearing in the Watchtower of November 1st, 1914, could not have been more appropriate. The years from 1914 to 1918 did indeed prove to be a testing season for the Bible students. Some of the tests came from within. Others came from without. Others came from outside. All of them, though, tested the Bible students in ways that revealed whether they really had the love of God in their hearts. Would they hold on to the Lord and his truth or let go? Great Expectations. On June the 28th, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was struck down by an assassin's bullet in Sarajevo. That assassination triggered the outbreak of the Great War, or World War I, as World War I was originally called. The fighting began in August 1914 when Germany swept into Belgium and France. By the autumn of that year, the bloodbath was well underway. The Gentile times have ended. Their kings have had their day. So exclaimed Brother Russell as he entered the dining room at the Brooklyn headquarters of the Watchtower Society the morning of Friday, October 2nd, 1914. Excitement was high. Most of those present had for years been looking forward to 1914. But what would the end of the Gentile times bring? World War I was raging, and at that time it was believed that the war was leading into a time of global anarchy that would result in the end of the existing system of things. There were also other expectations concerning 1914. Alexander H. McMillan, who had been baptized in September 1900, later recalled, "A few of us seriously thought we were going to heaven during the first week of that October." In fact, recalling the morning that Russell announced the end of the Gentile times, McMillan admitted, "We were highly excited, and I would not have been surprised if at that moment we had just started up, that becoming the signal to begin ascending heavenward. But, of course, there was nothing like that. Disappointed expectations as to the return of the Lord Jesus had in the 19th century caused many followers of William Miller and various Adventist groups to lose faith. But what about the Bible students associated with Russell? Had some been attacked by the thought of their own early salvation rather than love for God and a strong desire to do His will? Quotations from A.H. McMillan in this chapter are taken from his book, Faith in the March, published in 1957 by Patience Hall, Inc. Some of us had been a bit too hasty. As October 1914 approached, some of the Bible students expected that at the end of the Gentile times, they, as Spirit-anointed Christians, would receive their heavenly reward. Illustrating this is an incident that took place at a convention of the Bible students in Saratoga Springs, New York. September 27th to 30th, 1914, A.H. McMillan, who had been baptized 14 years earlier, gave a discourse on Wednesday, September 30th. In it, he stated, "This is probably the last public address I shall ever deliver, because we shall be going home to heaven soon." However, 2 days later, Friday, October 2nd, McMillan came in for some good-natured teasing back in Brooklyn, where the Covenanters, where the Conventioners were to reconvene. From his seat at the head of the table, C.T. Russell announced, "We are going to make some changes in the program for Sunday, October 4th. At 10:30 Sunday morning, Brother McMillan will give us an address." The response, McMillan later wrote, "Everybody laughed heartily, recalling what I had said on Wednesday at Saratoga Springs, my last public address." Well, McMillan continued, "Then I had to get busy to find something to say. I found Psalm 74:9. We see not our signs. There is no more any prophet, neither is there among us any that knoweth how long." Now, what was different? In that talk, I tried to show the friends that perhaps some of us had been a bit too hasty in thinking for us to do would be to keep busy in the Lord's service until he determined when any of his approved servants would be taken home to heaven. Let's see here. All right, Rick Perry said something about the great apostasy and Mormon Shaggy and me being a JW. Well, Rick Perry, you don't even know if you're an Anglican or a Roman Catholic. And also, I proved that the great apostasy was being talked about by Protestants as far back as the 1600s. That's before the Jacobins even existed. So, that's been debunked. The Archangel Michael is a hard man. JWs have fled Brooklyn now. I don't know much about them. Sounds interesting. The JWs are heavy dope in GL. We need him. He is going to be big. Brother and sister of destruction. Okay, just reading the chat a little bit. Let's see here. Brother Russell, were you not disappointed? Brother Russell had been encouraging the Bible students to keep on the watch and to be determined to continue in the Lord's work, even if matters did not culminate as soon as they might have expected. October 1914 passed, and C.T. Russell and his associates were still on earth. Then October 1915 passed. Was Russell disappointed? In the Watchtower of February 1st, 1916, he wrote, "But Brother Russell, what is your thoughts as to the time of our change? Were you not disappointed that it did not come when we hoped that it would? You will ask. No, we reply, we were not disappointed, brethren. Those of us who are in the right attitude toward God are not disappointed at any of his arrangements. We did not wish our own will to be done. So when we found out that we were expecting the wrong thing in October 1914, then we were glad. Okay, so when we found out that we were expecting the wrong thing in October 1914, brethren, those of us who are in the right attitude toward God are not disappointed at any of his arrangements. We did not wish our own will to be done. So when we found out that we were expecting the wrong thing in October 1914, then we were glad that the Lord did not change his plan to suit us. We did not wish him to do so. We merely wish to be able to apprehend his plans and purposes. No, the Bible students were not taken home to heaven in October 1914. Nevertheless, the Gentile times did not end in that year. Clearly, the Bible students had more to learn as to the significance of 1914. Meanwhile, what were they to do? Work. As the Watchtower of September 1st, 1916 put it, we imagined that the harvest work of gathering the church of anointed ones would be accomplished before the end of the Gentile times. But nothing in the Bible so said. We are regretful that the harvest work continues. Nay, verily, our present attitude, dear brethren, should be one of great gratitude toward God, increasing appreciation of the beautiful truth which he has granted us the privilege of seeing and being identified with, and increasing zeal in helping to bring the truth to the knowledge of others. But was there much more to be done in the harvest work? Brother Russell evidently thought so, indicating this was a conversation he had with Brother Macmillan in the fall of 1916. Calling Macmillan to his study at Brooklyn, Bethel, Russell told him, "The work is increasing rapidly, and it will continue to increase. For there is a worldwide work to be done in preaching the gospel of the kingdom in all the world." Russell spent 3.5 hours outlining to Macmillan what he saw from the Bible to be the great work yet ahead. The Bible students had come through a difficult test, but with the help of the Watchtower, they were strengthened to triumph over disappointment. The testing season, however, was far from over. What is going to happen now? On October 31st, 1916, 64-year-old Charles Taze Russell died on a train at Pampa, Texas. Many newspapers reported on the funeral. What is going to happen now? On October 16th, 1916, Brother Russell and his secretary, Menta Sturgeon, departed on a previously arranged lecture tour of western and southern parts of the United States. Russell, though, was seriously ill at that time. The tour took them first to Detroit, Michigan, by way of Canada. Then, after stops in Illinois, Kansas, and Texas, the two men arrived in California, where Russell delivered his last talk on Sunday, October 29th, in Los Angeles. 2 days later, in the early afternoon of Tuesday, October 31st, 64-year-old Charles Taze Russell died on a train at Pampa, Texas. Notice of his death appeared in the Watchtower of November 15th, 1916. What was the effect on the Bethel family when news of Brother Russell's death was announced. A. H. McMillan, who served as Russell's assistant in the office while Russell was away, later recalled the morning he read the telegram to the Bethel family. A moan went up all over that dining room. Some wept audibly. None ate breakfast that morning. All were greatly upset. At the end of the meal period, they met in little groups to talk and whisper, "What is going to happen now?" Little work was done that day. We did not know what to do. It was so unexpected, and yet Russell had tried to prepare us for it. What would we do? The first shock of our loss of C.T. Russell was the worst. For those first few days, our future was a blank wall. Throughout his life, Russell had been the society. The work centered around his dynamic determination to see God's will done. After funeral services at the Temple in New York and at Carnegie Hall in Pittsburgh, Brother Russell was buried in Allegheny, in the Bethel family plot, according to his request. A brief biography of Russell, along with his will and testament, was published in the Watchtower of December 1st, 1916, as well as in subsequent editions of the first volume of Studies in the Scriptures. What would happen now? It was difficult for the Bible students to imagine someone else in Brother Russell's place. Would their understanding of the Scriptures continue to be progressive? Or would it stop where it was? Would they become a sect centered around him? Russell himself had made it clear that he expected the work to go on. So, following his death, some obvious questions soon arose. Who will supervise the contents of the Watchtower and other publications? Who would succeed Russell as president? Rick Perry follows the Christus Victor doctrine. So Rick Perry actually literally believes that all of the prophecies and all of the miracles that Christ promised throughout the New Testament were already done in the first century. He has to believe that in order to support Christus Victor. Rick Perry also is very anti-Semitic and hates Jewish people and hates Muslims and other religious groups, and he opposes the First Amendment. Rick Perry has demonstrated multiple times that he does not believe in the First Amendment or the Constitution, and does not even support the rights in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. I just wanted to point that out. A change in administration. All right, so we now have Joseph Rutherford. Joseph Rutherford, who was a lawyer from Missouri. A change in administration. In his will, Brother Russell outlined an arrangement for an editorial committee of 5 to determine the contents of the Watchtower. In addition, the Board of Directors of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society made arrangements for an executive committee of 3. A.I. Ritchie, W.E. Van Amberth, and J.F. Rutherford, to have general supervision of all the work of the society, subject to the control of the Board of Directors, who, though would become the new president, That decision would be made at the next annual meeting of the society, about 2 months later on January 9th, 1917. At first, the executive committee did its best to hold things together, encouraging the Bible students to keep active and not lose courage. The Watchtower continued to be published, containing articles that Russell had written before his death. But as the annual meeting approached, tension began to mount. Some were even doing a little electioneering to get a man of their choice selected to be president. Others, on account of their deep respect for Brother Russell, seemed more concerned with trying to copy his qualities and develop a sort of cult around him. Most of the Bible students, however, were primarily interested in getting on with the work into which Russell had poured himself. As the time for the election approached, the question remained, who would succeed Russell as president? The Watchtower of January 15th, 1917, reported the outcome of the annual meeting, explaining Brother Pearson, with very appropriate remarks and expressions of appreciation and love for Brother Russell, stated that he had received word as proxy holder from friends all over the land to the effect that he cast their votes for Brother J.F. Rutherford for president. And he further stated that he was in full sympathy with this. After Rutherford's name was placed in nomination and seconded, there were no further nominations. The secretary cast the ballot as directed, and Brother Rutherford was declared the unanimous choice of the convention as president. With the election decided, how was the new president received? The Watchtower mentioned above reported, the friends everywhere had prayed earnestly for the Lord's guidance and direction to the matter of the election, and when it was concluded, everyone was content and happy, believing that the Lord had directed their deliberations and answered their prayers. Perfect harmony prevailed amongst all present. The perfect harmony, however, did not last very long. The new president was warmly received by many, but not by all. And this is a photo of J.F. Rutherford, the second president of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society. J.F. Rutherford had a commanding appearance, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighing about 220 pounds. According to the charter of the Watchtower Society, the board of directors was to be composed of 7 members. The charter provided for the surviving members of the board of directors to fill a vacancy. So 2 days after Russell's death, the board of directors met and elected A.N. Pearson to be a member. The 7 members of the board at that point were A.I. Ritchie, W.E. Van Amberth, H.C. Rockwell, J.D. Wright, I.F. Hoskins, A.N. Pearson, and J.F. Rutherford. The 7-member board was elected. The 7-member board then elected the executive committee of 3. The new president moves ahead. Brother Rutherford was inclined not to change the direction of the organization, but to continue in the forward-moving pattern established by Russell. Traveling representatives of the society, known as pilgrims, were increased from 69 to 93. Distribution of the society's free tracts was accelerated on occasional Sundays in front of the churches and regularly in the house-to-house ministry. The pastoral work, which had been started prior to Russell's death, was now stepped up. This was a follow-up work, similar to the return visit activity now carried on by Jehovah's Witnesses. To further revitalize the preaching work, the Society's new president expanded the Colpertier work. Colpertiers, forerunners of today's pioneers, were increased from 372 to 461. The year 1917 opened with a rather discouraging outlook. The year 1917 opened with a rather discouraging outlook, stated the Watchtower of December 15th, 1917. Yes, following the death of C.T. Russell, there were some misgivings, some doubts, and some fears. Yet the year-end reports was encouraging. Field activity had increased. Clearly, the work was moving ahead. Had the Bible students passed another test, the death of C.T. Russell successfully? Efforts to gain control. Not everyone was supportive of the new president. C.T. Russell and J.F. Rutherford were very different men. They had different personalities and came from different backgrounds. These differences were hard for some to accept. In their minds, no one could fill Brother Russell's shoes. A few, especially at headquarters, actually resented Brother Rutherford. The fact that the work was moving ahead and that he was making every effort to follow the arrangements that had been in place by Russell did not seem to impress them. Opposition soon mounted. 4 members of the board of directors of the society went so far as to endeavor to wrest administrative control from Rutherford's hands. The situation came to a head in the summer of 1917 with the release of the finished mystery, the 7th volume of Studies in the Scriptures. Brother Russell had been unable to produce this volume during his lifetime. though he had hoped to do so. Following his death, the executive committee of the society arranged for 2 associates, Clayton J. Woodworth and George H. Fisher, to prepare this book, which was a commentary on Revelation, the Song of Solomon, and Ezekiel. In part, it was based on what Russell had written about these Bible books, and other comments and explanations were added. The completed manuscript was approved for publication by officers of the society and was released to the Bethel family at the dining table on Tuesday, July 17th, 1917. On that same occasion, a startling announcement was made. The 4 opposing directors had been removed, and Brother Rutherford had appointed 4 others to fill the vacancies. What was the reason? What was their reason? It was as if a bombshell had exploded. The 4 ousted directors seized upon the occasion and stirred up a 5-hour controversy before the Bethel family over the administration of the society's affairs. A number of the Bethel family sympathized with the opposers. The opposition continued for several weeks, with the disturbers threatening to overthrow the existing tyranny, as they put it. But Brother Rutherford had a sound basis for the action he had taken. How so? It turned out that although the 4 opposing directors had been appointed by Brother Russell, these appointments had never been confirmed by vote of the corporation members at the annual meeting of the society. Therefore, the 4 of them were not legal members of the board of directors at all. Rutherford had been aware of this, but had not mentioned it at first. Why not? He had wanted to avoid giving the impression that he was going against Brother Russell's wishes. However, when it became evident that they would not discontinue their opposition, Rutherford acted within his authority and responsibility as president to replace them with 4 others whose appointments were to be confirmed at the next annual meeting to be held in January 1918. Rutherford asked the opposers to leave Bethel. On August 8th, the disgruntled ex-directors and their supporters left the Bethel family. They had been asked to leave because of the disturbance they had been creating. They soon began spreading their opposition by an extensive speaking and letter-writing campaign throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. As a result, after the summer of 1917, a number of congregations of Bible students were split into 2 groups: those loyal to the society and those who were easy prey to the smooth talk of the opposers. But might the ousted directors, in an effort to gain control of the organization, try to influence those attending the annual meeting? Anticipating with a reaction, Rutherford felt it advisable to take a survey of all the congregations. The results, according to the report published in the Watchtower of December 15th, 1917, those voting indicated their overwhelming support of J.F. Rutherford and the directors cooperating with him. This was confirmed at the annual meeting. The opposers' efforts to gain control had failed. What became of those opposers and their supporters? After the January 1918 annual meeting, the opposing ones splintered off, even choosing to celebrate the memorial on March the 26th, 1918 on their own. Any unity they enjoyed was short-lived, and before long they broke up into various sects. In most cases, their numbers dwindled and their activity diminished or ceased entirely. Clearly, following Brother Russell's death, the Bible students faced a real test of loyalty. As Teresa P. Gott, who was baptized in 1915, put it, many of those who had seemed so strong, so devoted to the Lord, began to turn away. All of this just did not seem right, yet it was happening and it upset us. But I said to myself, what was this organization? But I said to myself, was not this organization the one that Jehovah and used to free us from the bonds of false religion? Have we not tasted of his goodness? Was not this organization the one that Jehovah used to free us from the bonds of false religion? Have we not tasted of his goodness? If we were to leave now, where would we go? Would we not wind up following some man? We would not see why we should go with the apostates, so we stayed. John 6:66-69, Hebrews 6:4-6. Some who withdrew from the organization later repented and dissociated with the Bible students in worship once again. By far the majority, like Sister Gott, continue to cooperate with the Watchtower Society and Brother Rutherford. The love and unity that bound them together had been built up through years of association together at meetings and conventions. They would allow nothing to break up that bond of union. Colossians 3:14. By 1918, the Bible students had survived testing from within. What though if opposition arose from those on the outside? J.F. Rutherford's background. Joseph Franklin Rutherford was born of Baptist parents on a farm in Morgan County, Missouri, USA on November 8, 1869. When Joseph was 16, his father consented to his attending college, provided that he pay his own way, and that he pay for a hired laborer to take his place on the farm. A determined young man, Joseph secured a loan from a friend and managed to go to college while also studying law. After completing his academy education, Rutherford spent 2 years under the tutelage of Judge E.I. Edwards. By the time he was 20, he became the official court reporter for the courts of the 14th Judicial Circuit in Missouri. On May 5, 1892, his license to practice law in Missouri was granted. Rutherford later served for 4 years as public prosecutor for Boonville, Missouri. Still later, he served on occasion as a special judge in the 8th Judicial Circuit Court of Missouri. That is why he came to be known as Judge Rutherford. Interestingly, to help pay his way through school, Rutherford sold encyclopedias from house to house. It was not an easy job. There were many rebuffs. On one occasion, he almost died when he fell into an icy stream while calling on farms. He promised himself that when he became a lawyer, if anyone ever came to his office selling books, he would buy them. True to his word, he accepted 3 volumes of Millennial Dawn from 2 colporteurs who appeared at his office early in 1894. Several weeks later, he read the books and promptly wrote a letter to the Watchtower Society in which he said, "My dear wife and myself have read these books with the keenest interest, and we consider it a godsend and a great blessing that we have had the opportunity of coming in contact with them." In 1906, Joseph F. Rutherford was baptized, and a year later he became the Watchtower Society's legal counsel. Rutherford asked the opposers to leave Bethel. At the annual meeting held on January 5th, 1918, the 7 persons receiving the highest number of votes were J.F. Rutherford, C.H. Anderson, W.E. Van Amberth, A.H. Macmillan, W.E. Spill, J.A. Bonnet, and J.H. Fisher. From these 7 board members, the 3 officers were chosen. J.F. Rutherford as president. Chosen, J.F. Rutherford is president. C.H. Anderson as vice president, and W.E. Van Amberth as secretary-treasurer. No men on earth more highly favored. On June 21st, 1918, J.F. Rutherford and several of his close associates were sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, having been falsely convicted of conspiracy. Their feelings, in a handwritten note dated June 22nd to 23rd, shown below, from the Raymond Street Jail in Brooklyn, New York. Brother Rutherford wrote, "There are probably no men on earth today more highly favored, and who are happier than the 7 brethren now in prison. They are conscious of their entire innocence of intentional wrongdoing, and rejoice to be suffering with Christ for loyally serving him." The Raymond Street Jail in Brooklyn, New York, where Brother Rutherford and several of his close associates were held for 7 days immediately following their sentencing. Objects of attack. Through the close of 1917 and into 1918, the Bible students energetically distributed the new book, The Finished Mystery. By the end of 1917, the printers were busy on the 850,000 edition, The Watchtower of December 15th, 1918, reported the sale of the 7th volume is unparalleled by the sale of any other book known in the same length of time, excepting the Bible. But not everyone was thrilled with the success of The Finished Mystery. The book contained some references to the clergy of Christendom that were very cutting. This so angered the clergy that they urged the government to suppress the publications of the Bible students. As a result of this clergy-inspired opposition, early in 1918, The Finished Mystery was banned in Canada. Opposition soon mounted against the Bible students in the United States to expose this clergy-inspired pressure on March 15th, 1918, the Watchtower Society released the tract Kingdom News Number 1. Kingdom News Number 1. Its message. Its message. The 6-column wide headline read, "Religious Intolerance. Pastor Russell's followers persecuted because they tell the people the truth." Below the heading, "Treatment of Bible Students Smacks of the Dark Ages," were set forth the facts of the persecution and the ban that had begun in Canada. The instigators. The tract pulled no punches in pointing to the clergy, who were described as a bigoted class of men who have systematically endeavored to prevent the people from understanding the Bible and to throttle all Bible teaching unless it comes through them. What a hard-hitting message! How did the clergy respond to such an expose? They had already stirred up trouble against the Watchtower Society, but now they got vicious. In the spring of 1918, a wave of violent persecution was launched against the Bible students in both North America and Europe. The clergy-inspired opposition came to a head on May 7th, 1918, when U.S. federal warrants were issued for the arrest of J.F. Rutherford and several of his close associates. By mid-1918, Rutherford and 7 associates found themselves in the federal penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia. But with Judge Rutherford and his associates in prison, what happened to the operation of headquarters? The Raymond Street Jail in Brooklyn, New York, where Brother Rutherford and several of his close associates were held for 7 days immediately following their sentencing. No men on earth more highly favored. On June the 21st, 1918, J.F. Rutherford and several of his close associates were sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, having been falsely convicted of conspiracy. Their feelings, in a handwritten note dated June 22nd to 23rd, shown below from the Raymond Street Jail in Brooklyn, New York, Brother Rutherford wrote, There are probably no men on earth today more highly favored and who are happier than the 7 brethren now in prison. They are conscious of their entire innocence of intentional wrongdoing and rejoice to be suffering with Christ for loyally serving him. Victims of clergy-inspired persecution. By the middle of 1918, J. F. Rutherford and 7 of his associates were in prison. Victims of clergy-inspired opposition. But those 8 men were not the only targets of such hatred. During earlier years, it had been C.T. Russell who was primarily the object of attack by the clergy and the press. Now the Bible students themselves were victims. The golden age, now awake, of September 29th, 1920, published a graphic, extensive report of vicious persecution they endured in the United States. It read like something out of the Inquisition. Included were the following accounts. April 22nd, 1918, at Windward, Oklahoma, Claude Watson was first jailed and then deliberately released to a mob composed of preachers, businessmen, and a few others that knocked him down, caused a inward to whip him, and then he had partially, and when he partially recovered, to whip him again. They then poured tar and feathers all over him, rubbing the tar onto his hair and scalp. April 29th, 1918, at Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, W.B. Duncan, 61 years of age, Edward French, Charles Franca, and Mr. Griffin and Mrs. D. Van Hosen were jailed. The jail was broken into by a mob that used the most vile and obscene language, whipped, tarred, feathered, and drove them from town. Duncan was compelled to walk 26 miles to his home and barely recovered. Griffin was virtually blinded and died from the assault a few months later. April 30th, 1918, at Minerva, Ohio, S.H. Griffin was first jailed and then released to a mob, then lectured 15 minutes by the minister, then struck repeatedly, cursed, kicked, trodden upon, threatened with hanging and with drowning, driven from town, spit upon, tripped repeatedly, jabbed repeatedly with an umbrella, forbidden to ride, followed 5 miles to Malvern, Ohio, re-arrested, jailed for safety at Carrollton, and finally taken home by brave and faithful officials who, after examining his literature, said in so many words, We find no fault in this man. Keeping the home fires burning. Back in Brooklyn, an executive committee was appointed to take charge of the work. A chief concern of the brothers appointed was to keep the watchtower in circulation. The Bible students everywhere certainly needed all the spiritual encouragement that could be given them. In fact, during this entire testing season, not one issue of the Watchtower failed to appear in print. What was the spirit at headquarters? Thomas Bud Sullivan, who later served as a member of the governing body, recalled, "It was my privilege to visit Brooklyn Bethel in the late summer of 1918 during the brothers' incarceration. The brothers in charge of the work at Bethel were in no wise fearful or downhearted. In fact, the reverse was true. They were optimistic and confident that Jehovah would give his people the victory ultimately. I was privileged to be at the breakfast table on Monday morning when the brothers sent out on weekend appointments gave their reports. A fine picture of the situation was obtained. In every case, the brothers were confident, waiting for Jehovah to direct their activities further. Many problems, however, were encountered. World War I was still raging. There were shortages of paper supplies and coal, which were vitally needed for the work at headquarters. With patriotism at fever pitch, there was considerable animosity against the society. The Bible students were viewed as traitors. Under these extreme circumstances, it appeared impossible to continue operations at Brooklyn. So the executive committee, after consulting with other brothers, sold the Brooklyn Tabernacle and closed the Bethel home. On August 26th, 1918, the operations were transferred back to Pittsburgh to an office building at Federal and Reliance Streets. Nevertheless, a good spirit prevailed. Martha Meredith recalled, "We in Pittsburgh got together and decided we were going to keep the home fires burning until the brethren got out of prison." At that time, the Brooklyn office was moved to Pittsburgh. So the brethren got busy writing articles for the Watchtower and had it printed. When the watchtower were ready to be sent out, we sisters wrapped them and sent them out to the people. The Bible students had faced some severe trials since the Gentile times had ended in the fall of 1914. Could they continue to survive? Did they really have the love of God in their hearts or not? Would they firmly hold on to the Lord and his truths, as Russell had cautioned, or would they let go? On earlier occasions, issues of the Watchtower had been combined, but this was not done during 1914 to 1918. Thomas Bud Sullivan visited headquarters in 1918 and later served on the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Alrighty then. So this has been the testing time, a time in which Charles Taze Russell died while on a visiting tour around the country, when Joseph Rutherford became the new president, when opposition bodies and members of the board head forced direct opposition to the leadership of Joseph Rutherford and eventually led to a breaking away and a defection out of the society, and then an outright persecution, outright accusations of disloyalty against the American and Canadian governments, and even the jailing of Joseph Rutherford and various others on trials of conspiracy. 1914 until 1918 truly was a testing time for the Bible students. Next time, I will cover Chapter 7, Advertise the King and the Kingdom, 1919 to 1942. All right. Verdanian 808 says Alphaville were big in Japan. Got to get WH to believe this. What are you talking about, Verdanian? Verdanian says, I used to date an archaeologist. She was great in the feather, but she kept digging the past up. Verdanian, why don't you tell Rick Perry your joke? Davy Crockett had 3 ears. He had his left ear, the right ear, and the wild frontier. Rick Perry, all I know for sure is that I'm a hard man. You live in spiritual darkness, Rick Perry. Verdanian says, the hardest of the forge is the WH's movie reviews, coming soon. Quartermass and the Pit. All right, so I've been your host, Imperator of Forge, otherwise known as Forge Warhammer. Thank you for watching. Forge Gang! I am still a hard man! Stay hard!